welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Temi and I am a 34-year-old PhD student. Wanted to share some of the books that, as you can see by this title, I think have shaped me into what I hope as becoming a Black feminist radical or Black radical feminist. I think a lot of people that I've spoken to feel like they maybe don't really understand what Black feminism is, or they find it difficult to get into Black feminist literature. I think a lot of Black feminist work in the academy can feel a bit intimidating, like if you don't know the language or the lexicon. And I think if you haven't read the literature, I'm thinking of Toni Morrison, Octavia Butler, etc., etc., then maybe you're not sure of how some of the Black feminist themes that are in that work is also present in more of like a political, social, economic analysis of political ideology, pretty much. So, what do I mean by a Black radical feminist? Initially, I was like, oh, Black feminist books that radicalize me, and then I realized that obviously radicalization is a negative word, has a negative connotation. But what I mean by radicalization is that it created a paradigmatic shift in the ways that I was understanding feminism. And then I was thinking, okay, so it's more that I've always sort of understood, particularly in the work that I've done in NGO spaces, in civil society spaces, that I'm a lot more radical in my thinking, in my work, in my organizing, in my campaigning, that those institutions have allowed me to be. And so I think of myself as more of a Black radical feminist. And basically this just means that my viewpoint of feminism is that it really is about seeking to seeking to address the root causes of patriarchal oppression, and that it's not focused on the individual and individual choices as much of neoliberalism and neoliberal feminism is, but rather it sees women as a collective group that are and has been oppressed by men, patriarchy, capitalism, and sexism. I think also importantly for me, like Black radical feminism, is that it makes use of identity politics, not in the way that it has been sort of bastardized, but rather from the definition from the Combahee River Collective. And I think their definition is that identity politics is the focusing upon our own oppression is embodied in the concept of identity politics, and that we believe that the most profound and potentially the most radical politics come directly out of our own identity, as opposed to working to end somebody else's oppression. So basically identity politics is the idea that your position, who you are, and the identity that you exist in shapes obviously how you see the world and shapes the oppression that you also experience. So you can see how people can work against identity politics, but particularly in an organizing sense. So I'm thinking here of like the whole white savior perspective, right? Where you as a person are trying to end somebody else's oppression rather than thinking about the ways that perhaps you perpetuate oppression. So I have six books here that helped me sort of get to this perspective on feminism, on Black feminism, on this ideology, and that also shaped the ways that I think about living under patriarchy and capitalism, shapes my views on Black feminism, on love and friendship, and of course politics writ large. So I'm going to start from, like, I would say the least to most academic. And what I mean by that is, first of all, every single book I have here is by a Black woman academic, so there's that. And second of all, I just mean in the way that the language is used and sort of the accessibility. So without further ado, here are the books that shaped me into the Black feminist radical woman that I am today. Okay, so the first one is Eloquent Rage by Dr. Brittany Cooper, and the full title is Eloquent Rage, A Black Feminist Discovers Her Superpower. I first got this book, I think I bought it in 2020, but I had heard of it before then. So this book builds on Audre Lorde's theorizing in The Uses of Anger. And that's basically an essay where Lorde talks about how anger is a powerful force that can be useful in organizing towards our liberation, and that Black women have the right and have reason to be angry. In this book, it's part memoir, sort of part theory, and Brittany uses examples ranging from popular culture and her own life to sort of illustrate the power of rage. Now, this book, I think I had like a lot of expectations for it. Like I was really thinking more that it would be maybe a hands-on sort of like how rage can be useful, but it was definitely more like narrative and then illustrating those things through that thesis, I guess. And I would say, like, if you can get it from your library, if you can get it, borrow it from a friend, I would recommend it. It's not my favorite book. I also have to say that, like, since I first heard about Brittany Cooper, they have said some things that has made me question their own practice of their work. But she, you know, I think she's a Black woman. She's a Black woman in a bigger body. It shapes how she shows up in the world. And I think this was like a really good introduction into thinking about some of the issues, particularly in popular culture, that illustrate how Black women are consistently punched down on. And I think for all of these, I'm going to share one of my favorite sections. And one of my favorite sections in this book is in the chapter Orchestrated Fury. And in it, Brittany writes, respectability politics are at their core a rage management project. Learning to manage one's rage by daily tamping down that rage is a response to routine assaults on one's dignity in a world where rage might get you killed or cause you to lose your job. Mrs. Obama had to learn this lesson quickly, and on the national stage, after being accused and publicly caricatured as an angry Black woman when Mr. Obama ran for his first term. She chose to channel her energy into slaying the American public in another way by offering an impeccable standard of fashion to a watching world. Sometimes that is what Black women do when we can't give in to the murderous levels of rage we feel at the indignities we experience. We can't kill, but we can slay. Rage is a fundamentally more reasonable response to America's cultural investment in the disrespect of Black women than being respectable. That's why it's damn near impossible for rage and respectability to reside in the same place. On her last day, Mrs. Obama didn't sublimate the rage over Trump and his wife to the province of the slay. She simply refused. Rage is a kind of refusal. And I love this point. I really, really love this point. And I think that people think about anger as sort of this all-encompassing emotion where people don't have control. But anger and rage can be very powerful, and you can show your rage in different ways. And I remember this day. I remember that Mrs. Obama did not show up sort of hair laid to the gods as she typically does. And I think it's a really interesting analysis that Brittany Cooper makes here. So she says, rage is a kind of refusal. To be made a fool of, to be silenced, to be shamed, or to stand for anybody's bullshit. It is a refusal of the lie that Black women's anger in the face of routine, everyday injustice is not legitimate. Black women's rage is a way of looking these mischaracterizations in the fake and responding, you got me all the way fucked up. And I remember reading this and thinking exactly how my mother has used anger to advocate for me, particularly when I was younger and I was at school. And when I was younger, I was a little bit like embarrassed, I think. But now I look back and I think that she used her anger as a way to say no, and as part of that refusal. And yeah, so this book, I would say, if you're looking for more of an easy access, sort of like memoir style look into Black feminism from a very personal experiences and sort of less of the theoretical, then I would recommend Eloquent Rage. The second book is by someone who I am obsessed with. If you know me at all, you will know that Dr. Tressie McMillan Cottom is my academic aspiration, inspiration. I think she is phenomenal. Her writing is so incisive. If you have a New York Times subscription, or if you can get one, she has a newsletter. Her writing will change you. Her analysis is so sharp, and it is so considered, and it is also so accessible, and that is incredibly difficult to do because she is so smart. So Thick by Dr. Tressie McMillan Cottom is, I would say, like a classic piece of contemporary Black intellectual thought. She sort of blends sociological analysis. I think she initially trained as a sociologist, sort of like with her own personal narrative on white supremacy, on how Black women sort of use status as a signal, on beauty and the cost of beauty, and on social media. She has a section on LinkedIn, which is just hilarious. I love her. I don't know her, but I love her. Every time I read her writing, I feel smarter. I feel like I've learned something. And it's also really interesting because this is actually a collection of essays. And that's very difficult to do, such incisive work in the personal essay format. And it's something that I hope to emulate. So if you've ever read any of my writing and you think it's even a little bit like Tressie's, please let me know, because that will just make me so happy. I don't know what else to say about this book other than get it and read it and keep reading it. It's also a book that hasn't been aged. I feel like in Eloquent Rage, some of the examples feel like a bit dated, and not that that's Brittany's fault, but just the way that her I guess choices of examples feel a bit dated. But Tressie, in the way that she uses examples, continually, I think, explain the current conjecture that we are in. She's great. And so now I'm going to read you one of my favorite sections, and this is in I think the final essay, and it's called Girl 6. Black women do not have all the answers. We are not superheroes, and ours is not the definitive worldview, but we are trustworthy subjects of our own experiences and of ways of knowing. And I would say this line is explicitly related to the core tenet of Black feminism, that Black women are generators of knowledge, and that Black women's own lived experiences does shape said knowledge. And then Tressie continues, one of the more resilient slogans from the social media era of Black cultural production is trust Black women. Sisters on social media say it to make their legitimate claim to what they know about their own experiences. Others, whether in solidarity or because it sounds cool, say it to check those who are questioning a Black woman's truth claim. More recently, Trust Black Women even filtered out to mainstream politics. As the Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and Donald Trump debates were raging during the 2016 presidential election, high-profile women pointed to Black women's overwhelming support for Clinton as an indicator of how the Democratic Party should govern. Trust Black Women, Linda Sarsour, national co-chair of the Women's March, told her supporters, the idea of trusting Black women is intrinsic to my desire to see a Black woman on the op-ed pages. It is not that all or any Black woman is beyond reproach, not all skinfolk or kinfolk, but that she cannot be reproached merely for being a Black woman. It is still a radical idea. It is at the heart of my research. Black women are rational and human. Working from that assumption, I work my way analytically through political theory, economics, history, sociology, and culture. It rarely fails me. She's so good. And I think this point for me too, that Black women are rational and human. I love this because oftentimes when you do work on Black women or race or racism or blah, 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 first of all, if you talk about Black people in the academy, they'll be like, oh, you're talking about racism. And like, yes, of course, in thinking about Black women's lives, I cannot ignore the fact that racism is part of it, but I do not want, nor does my research focus on racism. And so I love that she writes that Black women are flawed and Black women are human, and we have, you know, a heterogeneity of Black womanhood that is so rarely allowed to exist in media or in academia. And yeah, I just think it's phenomenal. This would be probably my number one book to suggest people get. Okay, the next book is All About Love, Bell Hooks. This is probably the most popular book on my list. I remember there was like a point like maybe 2 years ago where like everybody was like, probably the summer of Black Squares actually, yeah, when people were like, read Black people. And this was the book, and really I don't feel like this should have been the book that everyone should have been fucking recommending, but I digress. I read this book after / towards the end of a very toxic relationship where I was not receiving love how I wanted to receive. This book for me is a new approach. I'm not religious, but I want to say it's like a new Bible for what love means, and not only romantic love. And that is what I love about this book, is that it doesn't just talk about romantic love. It talks about child rearing and love. It talks about friendship. It talks about community and love. And I read this book and I was like, oh, I don't know anything about love. I know nothing at all. And I think that's why it was really popular, because, you know, it was sort of this reshaping, this reconstitution of what love should mean, particularly from a Black woman's perspective. I actually think in this book, there is like talk about Black womanhood, but I would say it's more of almost like a historiography of love and the ways that love has been taught in society. If you're interested in questioning or challenging some of the thoughts and assumptions you have about love and about romantic relationships, I recommend this book. I included it in this list because of this section that I'm gonna read now. So let me read that now, then I'll explain a bit more. So in the chapter Clarity, Give Love Words, which is all about the definition of love, Hooks says, to begin by always thinking of love as an action rather than a feeling is one way in which anyone using the word in this manner automatically assumes accountability and responsibility. We are often taught we have no control over our feelings, yet most of us accept that we choose our actions, that intention and will inform what we do. We also accept that our actions have consequences. To think of actions shaping feelings is one way we rid ourselves of conventionally accepted assumptions, such as that parents love their children or that one simply falls in love without exercising will or choice, that there are such things as crimes of passion, i.e. he, and trigger warning, killed her because he loved her so much. If we were constantly remembering that love is as love does, we would not use the word in a manner that devalues and degrades its meaning. When we are loving, we openly and honestly express care, affection, responsibility, respect, commitment, and trust. Definitions are vital starting points for the imagination, and I really agree with this. What we cannot imagine cannot come into being. A good definition marks our starting point and lets us know where we want to end up. As we move toward our desired destination, we chart the journey, creating a map. We need a map to guide us on our journey to love, starting with the place where we know what we mean when we speak of love. And I think the point about definitions is actually so simple, but for me, really shifted things for me, because if I think about it, the ways that I learned about love were primarily through media, particularly romantic love, right? Like we're not taught what love looks like or what love means at school. Maybe if you have very intentional parents, you're lucky, and you're taught that love is very much experienced. It's you learn through experience. So reading this book really helped me, because I was like, I have all the experiences that have shaped what I think about love, but I don't necessarily have the language for what I want to think about love, and it was sort of blending those two things together. So yeah, bell hooks. The next one is this tiny little penguin book, and it is Audre Lorde, The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House. A very oft quoted sentence, fragment, title. Have people read the whole thing? I don't know. I'm going to be really honest and say I have not had that much engagement with Audre Lorde. I've read this. I've read other essays. I'm not sure why, but I don't find myself coming back to her work. I'm not sure why. I've also read Sister Outsider, which I think I actually enjoyed the collection of essays in that more than the essays that are most commonly cited. I don't know. So I think it's so interesting. The back of this book says, from the self-described Black lesbian, mother, warrior, poet, these soaring, urgent essays on the power of women, poetry, and anger are filled with darkness and light. I don't know how I feel about that, but that's what it says. So my favorite essay from Ms. Lorde is actually The Uses of Anger. But what I am going to read from is from that is from the essay The Uses of the Erotic. And I think actually the reason maybe that I find myself not coming back to Audre Lorde is because her work is quite complex, and it requires a number of readings, I think, to really understand the essence of what she's saying. Maybe I'm a dum-dum, I don't know. I'm not saying that her words and that her use of language is complex, but I think the ways that she conceptualizes and brings together her ideas require rereading and thinking. Why I chose this book is because I think out of everyone I have mentioned in this list, she, I think, offers the most stringent socio-political analysis, the most like radical black feminist analysis. So that's why I would include it. So I think if you're thinking maybe more from an academic perspective, start here. And I love this section in the uses of the erotic. I have it highlighted because for me, it, again, just gave me a language to think about what joy is and why it's so powerful. So she says, another important way in which the erotic connection functions is the open and fearless underlining of my capacity for joy. In the way my body stretches to music and opens into response, hearkening to its deepest rhythms, so every level upon which I sense also opens to the erotically satisfying experience, whether it is dancing, building a bookcase, writing a poem, or examining an idea. That self-connection shared is a measure of the joy which I know myself to be capable of feeling, a reminder of my capacity for feeling, and that deep and irreplaceable knowledge of my capacity for joy comes to demand from all of my life that it be lived within the knowledge that such satisfaction is possible and does not have to be called marriage, nor God, nor an afterlife. And I think this is why I really relate to this essay, because in this argument, Audre Lorde is talking about how there are ways that we can experience joy, there are ways that we can experience happiness, there are ways that we can experience quote unquote erotic that let us know that it has transformative power that does not come from other institutions such as marriage or religion, right? And I think that knowledge, particularly for women, particularly for Black queer women, is powerful, because if you think about the ways that institutions such as marriage and God and religion have been used to weaponize and poison ideas about queerness and homosexuality, I think people who are queer might have felt, oh, the only way that I can feel that kind of power is by rebuking, who I am. And Audre Lorde makes a great argument that that's not possible, that doesn't have to be the only way that you can experience that. I also think it's a very powerful feminist argument because, again, for me, it connects to this idea that you don't have to have children to feel worthy, to feel like you are doing something that is for this world, that is above yourself, that you can experience these feelings outside of these very narrow ways that women have been told that their only use is for. And it's for someone who is childless, for someone who doesn't want children. That's what really resonated with me from this section of this essay. So, Audre Lorde. There's two left, and I would say that these are like the most academic, but in very different ways. So the first one is Patricia Hill Collins, Black Feminist Thought. This was my how-to book. This was my guidebook for Black feminist theory, Black feminist thought. I use this in my master's dissertation. It is heavily annotated. I come back to it again and again and again, not because I think Patricia Hill Collins is the be-all, end-all, say-all of Black feminist theory or Black feminist thought, but because it is a guidebook for me. I would say that if you are an academic, if you are thinking, okay, how do I learn about Black feminisms, I would start here. There's been a couple of different editions of this book. This is like the Pan-African. I'm dead. Look at these colors. Second edition of it, and it was quite expensive, and I think it still is quite expensive, but I bought it because I knew that I would keep coming back to it. What to say about this book? This book takes you through Black feminist thought, Black feminist theory, as a knowledge project. So I mean as sort of an epistemological guideline framework. And I have to say, like, if you don't agree with Collins's thinking of Black feminisms, of gender, of sex, I totally understand that. I'm saying that because I know one of my academic friends, hi Allie, if you're watching, isn't the biggest fan. But I have to say that it's a good outline, really. It's a good historiography. She talks through the social construction of Black feminist thought, core themes in Black feminist thought, so things like work and family and Black women's oppression, the power of self-definition, Black women's love relationship. She talks back to these themes, linking it to things like early Black women activists and abolitionists and the blues. And then she talks about, developing a Black feminist epistemology. I really recommend this book as like a good foundation and then of which to build on. And I am going to read this section, and this is all about finding a voice, something that Bell Hooks talks about and sort of talking back. And it's about Black women and finding and understanding and making use of our own self-definition. And Collins writes, why this theme of self-definition should preoccupy African American women is not surprising. Black women's lives are a series of negotiations that aim to reconcile the contradictions separating our own internally defined images of self as African American women with our objectification as the other. And for me, this is just a core principle of Black feminism, of like existing in Black womanhood. We have who we are, and then we have who society says we are. And this can be positive, this can be negative, thinking about the Mammy, the Jezebel. And I really related to this constant tension that Black women are subjected to, and how we have to resist and push back through that, and the exhaustion that comes with doing that type of work. Okay, last but not least, in any way, shape, or form. Someone else who I'm also obsessed with is Christina Sharpe. And her book, In the Wake on Blackness and Being, I can't even really talk about it because I haven't finished reading it. And I haven't finished reading it, 1, because I have other things to read, and 2, because it's hard, and 3, because it's dense. And I say it's hard is because Christina Sharpe is talking about Black lives after slavery. She's talking about archives. She's talking about Black death. And the kind of work that Black people do and been doing to recover that history and also to understand that history. This book, you know, she looks at literature, at visual culture, at film, and sort of like other everyday representations of Black life, which she sort of describes as being, a full compendium of what it means to live outside of the wake. And by the wake, she's talking about the slave ship, the slave hold in the wake of the water of the ship, basically to exist as Black people who are transported into different parts of the world. And this book has shaped me tremendously in how I'm thinking about my work around the Black diaspora, about what it means to be part of Black diaspora and what it means to do research, and how I want to write about that research. And I don't really know what else to say, in the sense that this work leaves me a bit speechless, because it's so powerful, and it's also very difficult to read. It is painful to read. But if you are interested in challenging yourself, if you're an academic working in any way related to Black lives, Black history, I would recommend reading this book. If you're not an academic, I also recommend reading this book, but it is hard. And the reason why I say if you're an academic is because then you have some motivation, you have some reason behind to keep pushing through and thinking about the connections she's making. Okay, so I'm going to read a section that I come back to. It's the beginning of the book, but a section that really transformed how I was thinking about my research. And Christina Sharpe writes, "In other words, for Black academics to produce legible work in the academy often means adhering to research methods that are drafted into the service of a larger destructive force, thereby doing violence to our own capacities to read, think, and imagine otherwise. Despite knowing otherwise, we are often disciplined into thinking through and along lines that reinscribe our own annihilation, reinforcing and reproducing what Sylvia Wynter has called our narratively condemned status. We must become undisciplined." And then I'm going to move forward, and then she says, "With this as the ground, I've been trying to articulate a method of encountering a past that is not past. A method along the lines of a sitting with, a gathering, and a tracking of phenomena that disproportionately and devastatingly affect Black peoples any and everywhere we are. I've been thinking of this gathering, this collecting and reading toward a new analytic, as the wake and wake work. And I'm interested in plotting, mapping, and collecting the archives of the everyday of Black imminent and imminent death, and in tracking the ways we resist, rupture, and disrupt that imminence and imminence aesthetically and materially. I'm interested in how we imagine ways of knowing that past in excess of the fictions of the archive, but not only that. I am interested too in the ways we recognize the many manifestations of that fiction and that excess, that past not yet past in the present." And I think it's that last little paragraph that for me really shook me, where she talks about basically how do we understand what has been told about Black lives, about Black history in the archive, but not only that, but also how do we understand those fictions and the way that that is a history, but it is also a present. It is also a present interval that we are living in that shapes how we are being as Black people. And that is, for me, what really made me rethink how I was thinking about the work I was doing on Black women's digital lives, and also about how I was thinking about the Black diaspora. So yeah, that's in the wake. So that's it. Those are the 6 books that have shaped me into more of a Black radical woman, a Black radical feminist. I hope you learned something new. I hope I added a few books to your reading list. And if you watch this and you're like, actually, no, I'm not going to read any of that, that's also fine. I hope I piqued your interest in any way. And other than that, I will see you in my next video. Bye.